Welcome everybody to the new Kevin Smith, The Great Witness Show. I'm Dean Bell here with Dean Kevin, The Great Witness, and let's see what you have today, Kevin. Welcome.
As we know, not only are the universal universities in operation and on the real side now, but the all-solar vessels are also. The overall consciousness affects the overall simulator, the life levels, the dimensions of it, according to the agreement ideas within the consciousness. And as we also know, the consciousness has overall been rather moulded according to the controllers to effect a simulator according to their design, a controlled literal consciousness that then effects a dark force reptilian matrix. This is the overall arena or simulator all individuals whose consciousness is a part of effecting share, like a huge multi-dimensional game. That's construction is based on all the individual consciousness file idea agreements that collectively effect it, and a consciousness that also affects the body vehicles with their decoding apparatus that then can convert the ideas of the decided consciousness into a simulation for all to experience. So an overall stadium constructed based on agreements through the overall consciousness that all individuals involved are present within, and then in this overall arena do individuals make their own unique contributions, their own idea creations within this greater simulator stadium. So for anything created, so would it feature within this overall stadium, that it would be accessible to all within the parameters of any additional agreement ideas which present as obstacles, geographical distances, etc., more so than limitations on the physical, as agreements through the consciousness have afforded these decided limitations of distance and time. Everything will start on the real side. Every idea conceived through the other dimensional aspects of the self, the thought ideas, etc., and in reality, as everything is, that which we create is instantly so, and indeed, the moment thoughts are created, so they express their nature on the real side, and can be experienced therefore, but based on how a consciousness, through its agreements, has decided the physical to be, unless there is a bypassing of that consciousness through the ethereal parts of the self, that then bypass also any limitation of the consciousness, and can have instant manifestation of ideas just as they are. In reality, ideas rather have to have particular action applied. As we think of the idea of a boat, for example, it is instantly so in real side reality, but the limitations through the consciousness dictate that boats require material to build, time, etc., where in fact, were it not for these decided physical limitations, a boat could pop into existence the moment we think it, and indeed, for some species, their consciousness is of a particular that they can do just this, instant physical manifestation of any idea. So really, if we have an idea we want made a physical level actuality, we do have to work through the laborious, agreed upon limitations that it can be so, and the consciousness overall is decided and agreed to be as it currently is, the overall effected simulation in accordance, an overall arena of control as the general stadium for most, with humans and the Earth being a prime example. And so, as the agreement to control already is established, so this affects the simulation where this is experienced, and as it has effectively been decided with all the individuals involved, rather a game then of controllers and the controlled, but to continue to bring forth further controlling measures and ideas within the established and agreed upon prison yard, further agreement to these additional particulars are required that they become so. In reality, then, all agreements are instantly so, and will be revealed on the real side, as all agreements, like any ideas, begin there, and then to become so on the physical, the various limitations through the consciousness must be worked with. A dystopian robot world doesn't just spring into being. As to reach that point, so must everything go through its cause to effect sequences of steps. But on the real side, everything that is being decided is present and complete. A robot dystopia can be already in effect as the instant expression of agreement, although with this delay factor between agreement and the processing of it onto the physical, so these agreements or the details can change, and on the real side then the effect culmination or future view must change in accordance. Only if agreement is maintained to a particular idea are the idea files rather installed permanently in the consciousness, rather than being constantly switched, and will filter through then to play out on the physical, go through the various stages to become a physical level actuality. It's one thing then to have agreement secured on the real side for an idea. The agreement, if maintained, will filter through to the physical as it does, but with the additional promotion of the idea on the physical, so can the actuality of an idea made physical level manifest through agreement be somewhat accelerated. For with most being somewhat one-dimensional, yes, they may generate thoughts, be conscious of them, and decide to bring about the action to make them a physical reality. But if agreements are gleaned on the real side, as indeed all agreements will be secured there first, most individuals will not be consciously aware of all the agreements they are making on the other dimensions of themselves, and the controllers will implant their subliminals that secure agreement and which filter through, but also operating on the real side, will allow far greater access to individuals as time and distance is no longer a factor. The guides could approach every individual in one single moment, whereas on the physical we are more limited through our ability to reach others on such a vast creational scale as we deal with a distance, accessibility, and time-decided limitations. And so always we will approach individuals on the real side as we can be far greater reaching in our efforts. But if it filters through or not to the physical, and the one-dimensional personal self is another matter, but they will be primed at least to rather recognize the hints in regards to the agreements they have made on the real side, and so should then a reference pertaining to that agreement come into their physical level experience, it ought to trigger the want to pursue it. Hence the necessity for physical level promotion of real references of the ears in conjunction with our real side operations of agreement securing. And the idea is to more so promote the ears on the physical, that yes, these universities and vessels are in operation now on the real side, but ideally to bring them through to the physical, so must their existence also be physical level promoted. The universities rather operate in simulation that isn't within the overall consciousness simulator arena, so they are rather by invite only, and accessible for those with the sincerity of real intent, etc., that like any simulation, the idea must be installed for the individual to experience the effects of, and for those who are sincere on their process, these ideas rather are afforded them that they can experience the universities. For if the UNUversALLs were ideas created from an individual whose consciousness was a part of this affected simulator, then it very much would be a creation within the simulator arena that all individuals could access through virtue of the interconnectedness of consciousness that affects this overall stadium, which has then any additional created idea being within this overall arena. So, for something to be simulated that doesn't feature within the overall simulator arena, it must stem from a consciousness that isn't a part of the overall consciousness that affects into our simulator, and so then represents an idea that must rather be provided, and then agreement to it affects simulated situations like pockets within the simulator. The vessels, however, from what I've seen, rather are viewable to all on the real side, suggesting it as an idea that stemmed from a consciousness vehicle that is a part of the simulator collective consciousness, that they can feature in the overall stadium for all to see. And so much by way of agreement is secured for the vessels on the real side, and agreement with the guides and the ears that these vessels represent and reference, and perchance to filter through to the physical, with the additional physical level references regarding the vessels in circulation that make agreement through the vast swathes of one-dimensional humans more likely. Although Dwayne has said these vessels are rather not the current focus, that if they can become so physical level manifest, then fine. However, on this real side experience, I would be seemingly making effort with a group to promote specifically these vessels. We would be carrying a portfolio of informations, diagrams, and vessel schematics, going from one end of creation to the other, much like on any real side agreement gleaning assignment, encountering all manner of beings in various exotic and sometimes indefinable locations, worlds, and realms, indefinable through a personal self at any rate, that has only its current lifetime of experience references to draw upon. We would overall be doing what is our primary objective, that of promoting the ears and affording the opportunity of recognizing this true reality. For just as it is with the natural environment that we point people to, so are the vessels and UNUversALLs a first step, and then to recognize what these are all hinting and pertaining to, the isness that all ideas are comparisons for. with some ideas as more purer references for the ears than others, although all ideas really reference the ears as being comparisons for that which the ears is not, but some ideas, as we know, specifically reference the ears, others reference only creation. It was rather a bombardment of imagery for the personal self, as though the overall objective recognized was the important factor to realize, as opposed to all the detail, the alien races, the worlds, etc. And so, as is often the case with irrelevant imagery, so we either skip these parts, or they flash by in rapid succession, just as we might fast forward to certain parts of a movie, or skip over the less essential parts. Interestingly, with some beings I engaged with, I would pull out a very expansive drawing of the vessels, and begin to colour them in, as though suggesting that I had the attention of the group of beings in question, and agreement that the idea of the vessels became more so for them, as opposed to an idea we might glance at and dismiss. For surely an idea we are enticed by would seem more vibrant, more alive, and for the beings I did have agreement with, so the vessel drawings firstly would have a colour applied, and then become as though huge three-dimensional versions that sprang from the very portfolio, as though coming to life. Although, as the group and I went about our vessel, and therefore is promoting activities, we would constantly be accosted by hordes of zombie-like beings. This was due to more the promoting of the vessel idea as it pertained to the earth, as it is here that these vessels were to become actualities, that as we approached then the overall humans, that their agreements could be secured, that the vast majority of humans, through their agreements, are also projecting themselves into more so states of unconscious, drone-like zombies, so this then expressed as resistance to the vessel idea, for of course, the more agreeable humans are to control, the more their circumstances reflect these agreements, they become that which they decide, transitioning into a kind of a Borg-like controlled species, wherewith the consciousness more so managed, and through the application of technological control, so would then a dark force controlled human consciousness be designed to not be in agreement with anything that would be beneficial with all life and awareness, as this would undermine the controllers and their positions, were individuals to remove agreement from their controller designed consciousness. And so, with the majority of humans becoming more so completely controlled zombies, with their consciousness managed to the extent that any beneficial with all life ideas would be instantly rejected, so this expressed here in this experience, that as we attempted to approach humans generally, yes, agreement was gleaned to a degree, but a constant horde of these shuffling unconscious and in complete agreement with the controllers, human zombies would present as interference to our delivery of the vessel idea. It was rather hard to describe precisely through the visuals afforded, but this was the general idea, that overall agreement through the humans as a species could not be secured as it pertained to specifically these vessels, but we had been more successful with other beings, body types and species, and whatever may come of that as things unfold. For although the vessels were specifically for being made an actuality on the physical, on the earth, the vessels overall, as they sail through and across the real side, are as a representation and reference to the ears for all in the simulator to see. Still, I was a little dismayed, a little downbeat, and with such a personal self, emotional idea creating response. So I found myself, in my personal self, represented by my being in my physical level house, recreated. For as we activate through the personal self, we sit in the affected illusions of that which we create through it. We remove ourselves from the nowness of the real awareness position, and that which was and is taking place, that which is awareness bolstering and is promoting as orchestrated through the real awareness, as it expresses as a constant promotion of the true reality it is, all of that is still taking place as our overall intent is for it to be. But we have removed ourselves from the view of it, and encased ourselves in that which is effected from the activations of the thoughts and emotions, overlapping personal self filters, which obscure our galactic assignments, etc. And so this was represented here as my being sat in my personal self-house. However, sat in our illusions we may be, but through the consciousness we now are in agreement with, consequently, can all the ideas and the individuals we have agreements with feature in our simulation. For our house, our consciousness, is a part of all houses, all consciousness that affects the overall simulation into a being. And so, through this interconnectedness, as we enter our houses, our personal self-consciousness, so have we opened ourselves up to all we share consciousness with, and can expect potentially house visits from anyone simulator-based. Whereas, stepping into the real awareness, can we be aside from the consciousness simulation, like watching the movie as opposed to featuring in it, and so we can view without imposition or the interjection of others into our experience. And then we might feature directly into simulated experience where necessary and where agreement allows as we go about our activities. And my agreements would extend to individuals that are not a part of this overall consciousness, such as the guides, that unless there is a direct agreement, they can't feature, as they have not a consciousness vehicle that is a part of the overall consciousness that affects the overall simulator arena, which denies them the ability to enter the experience of anyone within it without direct agreement. So, for guides, we rather have to agree with the idea of them, that we install then the avatar of them, the body form, into our consciousness simulator game. A body vehicle that affects from a consciousness that isn't a part of the simulator, and their real awareness can then feature through these uploaded avatars into our simulated game. And so, this is rather an open agreement permission that the guides can enter my simulated experience, even if it is within the illusions of the ideas I am effecting, as I activate the emotions and thoughts of the personal self, and so then am rather cocooned within my personal self, representing house. And so a guide would indeed manifest beside me in my house, and in the form of Peter, my father, as it is common that they adopt forms of older siblings and parental figures, etc. And if their behaviour doesn't reveal them as guides, then impressions through the real awareness will, if we step into the nowness of the real awareness reality, and are provided then this additional impression input. I must confess I was rather sulky and petulant, despite the group and I having secured the agreements we had, for we had not gleaned the human agreement on a scale large enough that it would make a difference in regards to the vessels, and so it was necessary for the guide to be rather stern with me, and somewhat snap me out of my nonsensical, emotional idea creating in response to the situations prior. For very often my personal self can be prone to petulance, and very often in response the guides, if they happen to be featuring at the time, are rather stern. But in fact this is the best thing, as it tends to have me recognize how being so doesn't make sense, and is a sure way to have my return to a state of balance and resume my positioning with my beingness, nowness, real awareness position, and aside from the emotions and thoughts of the personal self. And there the experience would end.
It's so cool because this is what's really taking place. And yes, the multi-dimensions that exist. And this is why people have been literalized to be one-dimensional, so they don't see these things. So they don't really see what's going on, and even their dreams are archaic and all scrambled, etc., trying to figure them out, because just like trying to get a frequency or a radio signal through a mountain, you know, it's not possible always because there's so much barrier. And so by the very fact of you're the great witness here and sharing this really helps a whole lot. So, you know, I can refer to it and others, but your actual experiences here with it, I have those too, but it's best to have the witnesses step forward, people that, you know, have the courage to figure this out, and you have very, very well in how you're articulated. It's just terrific. So just depends. And yes, these individuals, they're seeing that, you know, their technology is not the ultimate because it can be blasted from the sky. All technology can. It's so cool to build something, whatever, and it's like your computer, somebody throw it out the window and it's no good. So, you know, so much for technology. It seems to be a big deal, but it's really nothing because everything is awareness. So as they have certain abilities, which is cool. And yeah, they have the possibility to see more because they can't seem to leave the place. And many aliens and species, and including us with our human bodies. But again, as you know, the real awareness comes through, as more people become more aware in the true sense, not just spiritual, which is a cute idea, but that's all it is, and gods and salvation and all these things. It's about awareness. So yes, again, thank you, Kevin. That was terrific. Thank you.
The vessels, it's interesting how, like, Dwayne had this idea about the vessels. Initially, he was talking about working with the Taos Indians and doing hydroponics installations, but that wasn't big enough. That wasn't like enough of an intention getter. So he brought out this idea about ALLsolar research vessel or vessels, and that was more of a grand idea. So it's interesting how the guides took this idea, developed it on the real side, and people see it as it's being developed, like you, and you're part of that. And how one idea can expand upon itself, you know, with agreement, like what happened with the guides. They agreed to Dwayne's idea and developed it. Now the challenge is bringing it into the physical here, but that's how things work. We have these ideas, and especially if the real guides agree with them, then they can be expanded upon. The other thing you talked about, well, the unconscious agreement people have, and this is like, they don't see basically they're literalized, one-dimensional, so they don't see the other parts of themselves and how their agreements affect the other dimensions. And that's how the controllers have an up on people, because they just don't see their full self and what they've agreed to, because they are just stuck in this tunnel vision of things. So that's where it makes sense to wake up to your other bodies and to your other dimensions, and to be multidimensional. And then the last thing here, I get my notes here. When we relate to people, it's a challenge too, because they don't relate to what we're talking about with the isness. They relate to their former ideas and what they've been indoctrinated to. So it's very challenging to get people to see beyond what they think they know, what they've been self-convinced to know. And this is very, very huge shift for them, although subtle, but it's a huge shift. It doesn't have to be a big dramatic shift, but it's usually subtle, actually, is the way I see it. But it is a shift, you could say. They have to want to do it, decide to do it. No one's going to force them. But within that shift comes a huge, expansion, you could say, of an awareness that there's more to what they think they know. That with all the indoctrination through all the lifetimes people have gone through, it's a huge challenge here for the real guides and the new presentation. And I'll give it over to Ronald. If you have anything to comment, go ahead. Ronald, welcome.
Well, I agree with everything you say, and I can't add anything more. I think no matter what you say, it's true, no matter what level you're at. So you can say anything and it'll be true. That's my thoughts on it. I sort of like to know a little bit more of what the guides are doing. That seems to be missing out of our talks. I'd like to have a little bit more dialogue with that, what's going on there.
Do you have anything on that, Kevin? What the real guides are doing with your experience?
What aren't the guides doing? They're doing absolutely everything. They're orchestrating and setting up all the operations on the real side. Like in that experience I just shared, I mean, the presence of the vessels, the universities is all by their hand. They're continuously expanding visual representations of that which references the is throughout creation, from one dimensional end of it to the other. All our real side experiences as they pertain to our process awareness are catered for and designed and facilitated by the real guides. They're working with every single individual in creation to the extent to which their agreements and their intent will allow. And so they're doing absolutely everything with everybody they possibly can do in every dimensional area of creation as they can work around all the agreements, because the only thing that can prevent anything from happening is agreements through free will, which basically disallows these beneficial with all life and awareness situations taking place. So to answer your question, even though we may not necessarily see or be shown precisely what the real guides are doing, from what I've seen overall, I mean, there isn't anything the guides aren't doing. They're doing absolutely everything, because they are a complete, because they always operate in positions in which they are a constant promotion of the true reality which they stand in and are a part of. And so, the guys are doing, to answer that question, the guys are doing absolutely everything, and it just depends what of the everything they are doing that we are shown in our real side experiences, and how we recognize and how we interpret it, that which we are shown. So
let me add that we're used to this one-dimensional literalized view of things, and with that we have the way people get or change their mind or change consciousness or change their views usually by force or marketing or some kind of influence, the influence. But with the real guides, they're not doing that. So we don't see what they're doing. They're more around the perimeter, trying to get agreement, come in through people that are trying to wake up, decide to wake up. They're not trying to force things or influence things or market, which is the norm for, the personal mind, personal self. That's the way it understands things, but they don't do it that way. They're kind of surrounding us with things and then hinting, referencing, nudging, because again, free will, like Kevin said, free will is in play here, so they can't really infringe on that. So we don't see what they're doing, but it's a huge, they see the overall picture, so they see the bigger picture, whereas the personal self is very limited. So that's why Kevin, it's so important to listen to Kevin and what he sees from the real side, because it gives you another viewpoint.
Kevin, can you describe the guides? How many guides are there? And are they the original Viragi? If I'm pronouncing the word correctly. Are they the original Viragi groups? There used to be 22. Are there still about 8 or 9? And that's what happened to the rest of them if they're not there?
Well, the guides, like all individuals, if they have set their intent with the years, they will be continuously positioning themselves more so with that reality. And so if guides were guides but no longer appear to be operating in creation, it's very possible they have positioned themselves more so with the years, because there are, so to speak, tiers of, literally speaking, tiers of positions of assumption that can be assumed with the positioning with years. And an example of that would be the true silent ones, which from us in a sense they are a step beyond the guides, and so they are not operating directly in the simulated creation side. And so it's very possible if there are certain guides that were around that aren't any longer, it's likely they have moved into such positions as the true silent ones, or even beyond that. For me, I tend not to see the guides as they are generally depicted as the new books and such. I tend to see them more in the forms of other individuals. Generally, most commonly, my father they'll take the form of my father. Also, they'll take the form of my grandfather. And so I won't know exactly which guide that will be, but through the real awareness, can you have impressions of that which is behind the external, the surface forms that are projected? And so through the real awareness, you will always know a real guide when you're in the presence of them, because they have a certain inimicable presence about them, which is very hard to define. But I call it, it's like almost like the aura essence of the ears, almost. That again is you can't fake that. You either have it or you don't. And this is something that you can't determine through the personal self alone, because the personal self can only see the surface visuals. To determine a real guide through the impressions, you have to step into that which can afford you the impressions, that which is aside from the simulation where only the visuals will be available, and that would be the real awareness. And so only if you stand in the real awareness can you determine a real guide based on their signature sense about them that reveals them as such. And so I always had the impression that the individual who takes the form of my grandfather, I had the impression was REBISAR, because he is quite a no-nonsense, very stern character. So all the guides do have their own unique characteristics, and almost like their own ways of being about them. And with REBISAR, he is quite stern, no-nonsense sort of individual. And so personally, I couldn't say how many guides are in operation, how many guides are kicking around in creation. I mean, and everyone has their own individual experiences with certain guides. A lot of the new friends on some of the Skypes they have a lot of interactions with Phoebe Quantz, I think, and some of the others, Yorbal Sakabi and such, and whereas other individuals like Jeremy, he is specifically with generally REBISAR as the main guide that is with him. So everyone will have, almost like everyone almost has their own, they're almost assigned to certain guides accordingly. I don't know what determines that, who knows, but yeah, I can't say for certain how many guys kicking around or what they're doing or where they went. But as I said, every individual is on their own unique individual journeys. And so I suppose specifically if you wanted to know and it made sense for you to be shown, then you could determine on the real side what the guides are doing, you know, specifically where they happen to be and what their postings are. But personally, as I said, if the guides are in my experiences, they will either they won't take necessarily very often a central role in it. They will more or less be on the periphery. They'll be there almost like an extra in the scene. And a lot of times they do that as well because they don't want to necessarily be the center of attention. Because a lot of times, if you're having your real side experience, it is more that which they are showing you through the real side experience that is important, and they don't want your attention too much on them. You know, otherwise you're going, because a lot of people, when they see the guides, they'll be a bit, they can get a bit overwhelmed at the idea of they're in the presence of the guides, and that can take so much attention. They're not then paying attention to the experience they're trying to convey. So a lot of times they'll be there, but that's a lot of times why they assume the roles of parents and things, because then, as I said, they don't then sort of claim too much of your attention, and you pay attention more so what they're revealing. So personally, I don't know, but as I said, I can only speculate as to what they're doing, where they're going. But as I said, if they're not operating in creation now, it's very likely they are moved into positions such as the true silent ones or positions beyond that. And so there we go. It probably doesn't really answer your question, but I say I personally, I can't really know for certain, other than what I've seen and been shown.
Well, that's your interpretation, which is okay. It's fine. I sort of get a kick out of what Paul was talking about when he had two. I don't know whether it's proper to call them masters anymore or just call them guides. But he said the two of them were mad at each other and they were throwing rocks at each other, which shows aggression. I always wonder, how can they be guides if they're highly evolved and they're throwing rocks at each other? That was really weird. Just another weird thought.
Well, how many times have you heard Dwayne saying, you know, how the guides are like pissed off at him or, you know, frustrated with him? And he said that so many times. So it's still, once we're in the simulator here, we've still got that personal quality in our 5 bodies to deal with.
Yeah, you would think though, with that shows aggression.
Well,
if you think, how can a guide show aggression and be so highly evolved?
Well,
so you really got to look at these. It gives you a different interpretation of how to try to determine good and bad. It's really weird. It kind of screws your head up.
Well, you're thinking the indoctrinated like saint idea or savior, like these perfect beings. It's not. That's all made up stuff, you know. The saint idea, the God idea. So we're just doing what we do. It's free beings of light. We don't have to be good people or good, you know, pure. I mean, we don't have to do anything we want, you know. It's not what we've been told, you know. That's what the cool thing about the free guides. The real guide, you have total freedom here to do anything you want. You don't have to be good or saintly. Just be
It's
real.
hard to test the limits of that. How far can you go this way, and how far can you go that way, and how far before you throw yourself into the pits of hell? So it really gets you try to think. You know, how is the proper way to really think? And that's where the general public is at. That's a lot. I mean, you could go to college for the rest of your life and still not learn anything.
Okay, Kevin, second experience.
This experience would go back to February the 18th of this year, 2021. In this real side experience, I would find myself in the company of 3 other individuals, so a group that included me that equaled 4. The group then was another of the becoming more aware variety, as was my impression, and we seemed to be in some vast complex of buildings. When returning to the physical to record this experience, I'm uncertain exactly as to our business there, at least at that stage of the experience. But as is often the case in such real side experiences, at the time of its occurrence, everything made sense. We had intent of a purpose. The real awareness then was going about its business. The personal self afforded the view, but not questioning or considering what, why, and how things were taking place. For naturally, if we apply personal self idea considerations and literal thoughts to what is being experienced, we step out of the nowness of the real awareness, and on the real side, this would translate as the personal self moving out of the experience that the real awareness is executing and allowing the personal self to see, and probably sitting then in a more personal self experience, while the real awareness experience continues on, but without the personal self able to bear witness to it. So over time, the personal self, wanting to see these experiences, realizes that it must not interject with its created ideas. It must rather just sit back, keep quiet, and simply witness what's taking place. But then on awaking, rather has to figure out what took place, and some of it can make little sense to the personal self. But in this part of the experience, we were seeking something throughout this complex of buildings, and no additional impressions at that moment would I receive from the real awareness. The scene then would switch, and we were in another vast building, but this time amidst multitudes of individuals. The whole place had the feel of a kind of shopping mall. The mass of individuals very apparent as the unconscious, unaware, as they shuffled about in their own little illusory decided bubbles of self-convinced personal reality. I would have suggested then this building represented the collective personal self-consciousness of these people. Locked as they were in their consciousness, we moved through them unnoticed, quite clearly operating from a position beyond their perceptual, recognitional range. The real awareness experiences are aside from the personal self ones, and although the personal self-immersed individual can't see through their personal experiences to the real awareness side of the real side, and therefore situations and individuals operating from that position, it is so that the individual standing in their real awareness can quite readily see and enter the personal side experiences on the real side and move about unnoticed, unless they choose to be seen, as the real awareness oversees everything in creation, like how the guides move about creation invisible, as they operate from a position in life that requires an individual to move their view beyond the personal self bubbles of whatever they have decided if they want to experience and see in the reality that the guides are operating from. At least at this point in the experience, it was apparent as to our business here, for we seemed to be working with a security team, as it were, who, like us, went unnoticed among the unconscious unaware, for we were trying to capture a reptilian in fact, and again this reptilian individual was unseen by the multitudes, operating beyond the limited bubbles of the overall personal self-consciousness of these masses of people. One would assume then these security people may have been the real guides, and that they were securing a reptilian who had perhaps overstepped the mark, karmically speaking, which allows then the guides to act and even displace disruptive characters into the phantom zone. I would see glimpses of this reptilian, and although he was adopting a human form, masterful shapeshifters that they are, we were not to be fooled. Real awareness can see through all deception and subterfuge after all. Maybe he thought he would blend in, but perhaps realizing this wasn't working as we continued to pursue him through the shopping mall, he would resume his actual form, a two-legged, green-scaled, lizard-headed reptilian. Curiously, the security team would inform our group that this reptilian could be drawn to you by the use of numbers, but we were advised against doing so, as this reptilian was somehow contagious and could inflict individuals with some kind of a virus or taint if he bit or scratched. So it was rather a case of securing and containing this reptilian without close proximity. I'm uncertain how that was supposed to happen, but nevertheless we went about it. Although at a certain point I had the impression that something was off. I had assumed these security people to be the guides, but they didn't read right with my real awareness. And in fact, the reptilian we sought didn't exude ill intent at all. The impressions now was that this security team were the aggressors, and somehow my group and I had been tricked into assisting them in the hunting down of what was now quite clearly an innocent reptilian. For yes, the reptilians overall are the intergalactic creational warmongers, but a number of them are breaking ranks and coming around to wanting to become more aware and step up with the guides also, especially with the Queen of Orion displaced. And as my experiences have been revealing of late, there are endless varieties of reptilian species, much by way of diversity, subspecies, and offshoots from the main warmonger and aggressive attitude orientated reptilian species. The subspecies I came across in an underground cave system beneath a destroyed world as an example, on a real side experience I had shared before. And perhaps it's easy to assume all reptilians are bad, when in fact this is quite clearly not the case. It's just the ill-intended ones that give the entirety of the various species and versions of the reptilians a bad reputation, a kind of a prejudice, and indeed this leads to many of these less technological versions of reptilian, like the cave-dwelling ones, being hunted, exterminated, and caged. A little like the case on the city-sized spaceship from another real side experience I shared, where a certain species of reptilian had been rounded up and contained in suspension pods, and the officer even dragged around another reptilian on a leash. For the bigger picture, of course, is we are all beings of light with the ears, and we all are struggling in a creation to recognize who we really are, regardless of our body forms. Even the warmongering reptilians, the bad ones, they only do what they do because they are bored and don't in fact know why they are in creation and what they are doing in fact. So really, we are endeavouring to approach and engage with all individuals and species in creation, extending to them the same opportunity of standing real with the ears, regardless of what they have done up until this point. And so, somehow, my group and I had agreed to secure this reptilian, and very likely a deception. The security team may have presented as guides, and initially successful in fooling us, with us assuming therefore what we were doing made sense with the whole of life, was beneficial, awareness speaking, and perhaps we had accepted the notion that we were to be displacing an interfering reptilian. But maybe we had been duped into helping these characters capture and imprison an innocent reptilian after all, because as reptilians do break ranks, as they step up, they are, of course, making themselves vulnerable. The gun sights of the Kalorm god and his minions will be directed at them also now. And as other species of reptilian agree to become more aware and step up also, particularly those that are not technologically orientated and seek to control through a technology, and so are definitely vulnerable targets, they too will be taking quite the risk, as they oppose overall the will of the Kalorm. And it looks to me as though the Kalorm is mobilizing his various assets to target these stepping up reptilians, as was the case here in this experience. I can't speak for the other members of my group, but as I saw through the ruse, I decided to draw the reptilian to me through the method that the security team advised against. I created golden numbers in the air above me, and like a moth to a flame, the reptilian was instantly standing before me, initially aggressive, of course, and understandable given what had transpired, but it's as though we had an exchange of telepathic impressions, and he was apprised of the situation. He was able to read my intent and sincerity. For even though a reptilian may not necessarily have the connection established with their real awareness to read intent of individuals, through that real awareness discernment, they are telepathic and can read your every thought. So it is a kind of secondary creational method of determining intent, not as effective as, of course, individuals can hide thoughts, etc. But it would work for most individuals who have untrained and constant activation of their uncontrolled thought processes. As the reptilian came into my presence, we both teleported from this place. I assume my group were still working with the security team. Perhaps they had not seen through the deception of it. We rematerialized on a barren and rocky planet. I guess it was the home of this reptilian, but more so a kind of a refuge for him and a fair-sized group of other reptilians also. I had the impression that they all had decided to step up and become more aware, and now rather had become hunted for taking this risk, and had secured themselves here, where they perhaps thought they might be safe. The security team was right about one thing. These reptilians did indeed have a contagion, and although I was well accepted among them, I had become afflicted with it. The reptilian hadn't bitten or scratched me, but perhaps proximity was just as viable a delivery method. This particular affliction had a kind of mutagen effect, a sort of DNA altering type lycanthropy, and although these reptilians carried it, and it had no effect on their physical bodies, my body began to instantly transform into some kind of hairy beast creature. The reptilians backed up in alarm. Perhaps they were not expecting this to happen. As for them, they simply carried the affliction. It didn't cause a transformation in their bodies, but they settled down after a while, and I would continue conversing with them, just in my hairy beast body instead, through telepathic means, as is the general way a reptilian will communicate. So as is the idea, I continue to go out and about on the real side, encountering various species and individuals, bringing them on board with the galactic endeavors, garnering their agreements to it, and overall, where possible, pointing them to the references of the ears, the sharing the new you song, and the opportunity to become more aware. For the more individuals that become more aware, the more that step aside from the subconscious and conscious programming and agreement to distortion through the personal self, that is bringing about the demise of the simulator through a cause and effect. So this demise can be offset by fractions and degrees. As for my affliction, well, it didn't seem to be a problem other than alter my body vehicle, and more likely than not, my real awareness will go about the necessaries of removing it, and I'm sure the real guides will assist also, if it makes sense to do so.
No, that was excellent. You're seeing what's happening and you're doing it also. And yeah, they're going to play tricks on us because they're sending people out there to make them think that we're chasing bad guys when they're really not. So this becomes a challenge for us to really step up and interpret things, but we know what to say. It's very good. Yeah, we confront everything. So fun, huh? No, that's great, Kevin. Thank you. That says a lot.
Well, we could sure help. Need the help of the reptilians. Whoever we can get on our side would be great. The more the merrier. I wish there was more of them that would join.
Really, yeah, happy you're doing this, Kevin, because it gives us another, you're sharing what you're seeing, basically. You're sharing your experiences, but you're also sharing what you're seeing, and that gives us a chance to consider other viewpoints other than the literal, in a way. In a way, it's literal, but in a way, you're giving us multidimensional viewpoints by what you're seeing, and it gives us a chance to consider other things and how we consider things through our literal personal mind. So it's real cool. In the real guides, let's see, real guides move around. Again, this is kind of interesting how they work. And you mentioned this about the real guides in your experience, where they're like everywhere, because it's an isness. It's not, when we say everywhere, we're just, usually most people think, well, they see it through the filter of matter, energy, space, and time. But actually, if you see it through the isness, it just is. Everything just is. Our awareness just is. So the awareness can see everything at once. So that's how they're at all places at the same time, because it's not about matter, energy, space, and time. It's about an isness that already is. So if there's especially if there's agreement with people, like if we're agreeing to the real guides and what their projects are and what they're doing, then we're with them all the time. They're with us all the time. I'm using time, but it's an isness. And that's just very interesting how that all works. If we can just get past the literal part of ourselves, that's how they can be with us all the time, because it's an isness. There's no separation in a way. But again, we have to work through the process of working through our literal mind, which we have all these filters set up in front of us. I mean, subconsciously, mainly, all these things we have set up that we can't see. And look at Kevin. Kevin's like let go of these filters. So he has all these experiences, and the real guides are using him to share with us that most people don't have these kinds of experiences like Kevin, because of their filters, basically. They're agreed upon sensors and things like that. So it's really cool, Kevin. Thank you for what you're doing. Very rare, exceptional. We have someone like you. Thank you. Okay, anything with you, Kevin? Anything else you want to finish with?
Well, I'll just say, because the way that I'm sharing these experiences is that I'm sharing the most recent ones, or one of the most recent ones first, then I'm going backwards and sharing them as they go back through the timeline, so to speak. So I'm almost going backwards in time. So sometimes I will be sharing experiences where I will share something that happened after something else. When I make references in the experience, it may not make so much sense, because I'm because when I shared originally, obviously I had shared experiences prior to that, which threw a bit more light onto what I was explaining. Because in that last experience, when I was speaking about the reptilian, there were several experiences, a whole series and sequence of them that involved reptilians that led up to that as well. I made mention of this species of reptilian that were cave dwellers, that, for example, that I approached. And there was another situation where we went with a real guide with a group of individuals onto this spaceship, and we were engaging with these humanoid-looking beings, but they were very militarized, these particular beings. But they also were, but in a funny sort of turnaround sort of way, they were actually they are actually enslaving reptilians themselves, and they had them all contained in these stasis booths and stuff like that. And one of the officers had a reptilian on a leash, like his little pet, basically humiliating it and things of that regard. So it's actually quite interesting. You see the dynamic. I mean, always the main dynamic throughout creation generally tends to be the controlled and the controllers, and that plays out with all the species. It just seems to be a proclivity of the overall consciousness that species and individuals seem to segregate in, and that seems to be their dynamic. But as much as reptilians are overall and have been the intergalactic warmongers, that isn't necessarily an exclusive attitude just for that species, and you see it played out in various ways. And as I said, a lot of the reptilians are stepping up now, more so, almost by the day now. And the problem is as well, the reptilians have a situation with the reptilians is, because they do have this reputation as being the bad guys, and it's probably no accident that a lot of alternative media will not paint them in any other light than being the bad guys. Because again, if you're dealing with stepping up reptilians and everyone has this assumption they are evil, controlling beings, then it's going to be very hard for the reptilians to be able to approach humans in any shape or form without the human running away screaming or maybe shooting at them. And so they're in a bit of a difficult situation where, despite the numbers of them stepping up, they've somehow, it's almost like a bit of a re-education has to occur in regards to human consciousness, where they've got to realise that yes, reptilians, a lot of them have done what they've done, and the reptilians overall have been the species responsible for subjugating this planet and the human race through the consciousness of agreements. But a lot of them are stepping up now, and there's going to come a point where, as I've seen on a lot of real side experiences, the beneficial stepping up with life reptilians will make themselves known, but they're a bit reluctant to do so because of the reputation that they have. And sometimes with these alternative media people, even though they may mean well, they will not say one good word about the reptilians. And of course, these individuals, they're unfortunately painting the reptilians in an overall bad light that was making it really difficult for the reptilians to be able to approach humans in any shape or form. And so that's, I mean, you get that a bit with a lot of times their automatic reaction to the reptilians is they must be bad. I've seen that on a number of their Skypes, that they will encounter reptilians and you can almost feel it. They have an instant sort of they're repelled by the mere mention of the word reptilian. It's so ingrained in the human consciousness as these are the bad guys. That is an automatic reaction. And so that may be instrumental in why a lot of reptilians, the beneficial reptilians, will not approach a lot of the new friends on the real side. I mean, you'll get a lot of the aggressive, the controller ones will approach the new friends and attack them and do what they do on the real side. But a lot of times the beneficial stepping up with life reptilians won't, because they know that even with a lot of the new friends, they won't be very well received. And so that's why you really have to sort of get into a position when you're putting all these considerations, assumptions, convictions aside. And so you're almost like, so you're far more open and then more likely to be able to engage with these individuals, because, as I said, otherwise it's not really going to work. And as things move along, I mean, everyone has got to get out of this notion. They've got to see through the body forms, really. They've got to start to realise the real awareness that is the same real awareness that's animating through all the body forms, that we're all free beings of light, and we're all here for the same real purpose, to recognise these. And these are all just body forms that we're operating through in creation. And regardless of what we've done or what we haven't done, if we've been villains or the good guys, when it comes down to it, it doesn't really matter. But it's all just simulated experience. And when it all comes down to it, I mean, we all had to go through all of this in order to recognise the ears. And so, as I said, it's getting to the point now where a lot of people have to get through this idea and the preconceived notions of certain species being bad and certain species being good. I mean, obviously, you're not going to be naive. I mean, there are going to be still a lot of very bad and attitude-driven reptilians and aliens out there. But the thing is, if you have that as a blanket consideration, then it's going to be more detrimental than not for the galactic assignments and things of this nature, because it's just going to put a lot of these aliens off, and they're going to back off, and they're not going to approach or engage with new friends that they otherwise would have done had they not had to deal with the individual's attitudes toward them, whether they were justified or not. So in a long roundabout burbly way, I think I'll just stop with that.
Very well said. Thank you, Kevin. You. Ronald?
You.
You.